In the cold, silver-darkness of a Seattle night, when the rain fell so hard it felt like the sky was breaking apart, a poor single father named Marcus Hale raced down a deserted highway with his old pickup coughing beneath him. He had just finished a double shift hauling scrap metal, soaked to the bone, exhausted to the point where his vision blurred. Yet nothing prepared him for the sight he saw through the torrent ahead: a luxury car crumpled against a guardrail, steam rising from its hood, headlights flickering like a dying heartbeat. And lying on the ground beside it, drenched, motionless, and barely breathing, was a stranger who looked like he didn't belong anywhere near a lonely road or a storm like this. The man's suit alone cost more than Marcus made in a month. But what struck him wasn't the wealth, it was the way the man's hand twitched weakly, as if fighting to hold on to life for one more second. If you believe kindness and second chances still matter in this world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Marcus felt something tighten inside him, something that overruled his fear and fatigue. He jumped out into the storm and ran to the fallen stranger. The man's breathing was shallow, and Marcus could barely hear the faint whisper of air leaving his lungs. His pulse was weak. This was no simple accident, this man was dying. Without hesitating, Marcus lifted him into the back seat of his beat-up truck, ignoring the weight that pulled painfully at his arms and the rain that stabbed like needles into his skin. As he sped toward the nearest hospital, his heart pounded with the urgency of someone who understood exactly what it meant to feel helpless. Marcus had lived through that helplessness ever since his wife passed away 3 years earlier, leaving him to raise his little daughter Ava alone. He knew the fear of losing someone. He wouldn't let another family go through it if he could help it. By the time he reached the emergency entrance, nurses rushed out with a stretcher, shouting orders, covering the stranger in blankets, hooking him up to machines. Marcus stepped back, soaked shoes squishing on the floor, his breath coming in heavy bursts. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't even know who the man was. He only knew he had done what anyone should do: save a life. When the doctors finally came out hours later, their expressions were mixed with gratitude and exhaustion. They told Marcus that the man had been caught in a sudden medical crisis while driving, a heart failure episode caused by an undiagnosed condition. If Marcus hadn't found him when he did, the man would have died before help arrived. Still, they said he wasn't out of danger. They warned Marcus that the man would likely need emergency surgery in the morning. Marcus nodded, but a quiet embarrassment washed over him when they asked for his details. He didn't have the insurance or money to stay in the hospital overnight. He had to get home to Ava, who was with a neighbor. Before leaving, he stopped by the door of the ICU room, watching the stranger through the glass. The man looked ghostly pale beneath the fluorescent lights, tubes snaking around him, machines breathing beside him. Marcus wondered who he was, who he belonged to, and if anyone even knew what had happened to him in the storm. The next morning, when Marcus returned to check on him, he faced something he never expected. The hospital security guard stopped him, explaining that the patient, whose name was Jonathan Reeves, a billionaire tech investor known across the country, had strict privacy protocols. Visitors weren't being allowed in until the family arrived. Marcus understood, but disappointment sank into him. He wasn't trying to intrude. He just wanted to make sure the man lived. For days, life went back to its grinding normal. Marcus returned to his jobs, 3 of them, barely scraping together enough money to keep the lights on. Some days he skipped meals so that little Ava could have enough to eat. But every night, after he tucked her into bed, he drove back to the hospital to ask about Jonathan's condition. He was told the same thing: the family had arrived, the situation was being handled, the patient was recovering, and no, updates couldn't be shared with him. Marcus didn't argue. He simply walked out the doors each time with the quiet hope that the man he had saved was healing somewhere inside. Then, on a Thursday evening when Marcus was unloading junk metal behind the scrapyard, a sleek black sedan pulled up next to him. His heartbeat stuttered. No one who looked like they belonged in that car had business here. The door opened, and a sharply dressed man stepped out, holding a folder against his chest. His expression was unreadable. He asked if Marcus Hale was present. Marcus nodded cautiously. The man introduced himself as part of security and personal management for Jonathan Reeves. They had reviewed the report of the accident. They had surveillance footage. They had witness accounts. And everything pointed to one truth: Marcus had saved Jonathan's life. Before Marcus could even respond, the man held out an envelope. Inside it was a handwritten note from Jonathan himself, expressing gratitude so deep it didn't feel real. There was also a card explaining that Marcus was invited to Jonathan's private estate once the billionaire was well enough to meet him. The following week, Marcus drove up to an enormous property at the edge of Lake Washington. He felt out of place the moment he stepped through the gates, his boots muddy, his shirt faded. But he walked with the steady dignity of a man who had nothing to prove. Inside the mansion, he found Jonathan sitting in a wheelchair, pale but alive, a soft smile on his lips as he lifted his eyes to the men who had saved him. Jonathan thanked him, not with scripted corporate politeness but with raw, trembling sincerity. He told Marcus that he remembered nothing from the night except the feeling of being lifted, carried, protected. Marcus stayed humble, simply saying he had done what any decent person would. But Jonathan disagreed. He said most people wouldn't risk themselves in a storm. Most people wouldn't stop on an empty highway. Most people wouldn't step into danger with a stranger. Marcus had done it without thinking twice. As they spoke longer, Jonathan asked about Marcus's life. And Marcus, though reluctant, shared pieces of it, how he struggled to raise Ava, how bills piled up faster than paychecks, how he worked until his hands stiffened and his back burned, and how he still prayed each night for strength to give his daughter a better life than he had. What Marcus didn't expect was the silence that followed, thick, heavy, and laced with something like guilt. Jonathan finally revealed the truth that would shake Marcus to his core. He said that years ago, before he built his empire, before the money and the fame, he had grown up poor, too. His father had lost everything. They had lived in a rundown trailer. He had known what hunger felt like, what shame tasted like, what dreams looked like when they cracked under reality. The night he almost died in the rain, he had been returning from a board meeting where investors pressured him to cut funding for a charity program helping families in poverty. The same kind of families he once belonged to. The same kind Marcus belonged to now. Jonathan's voice broke when he said that he had honestly forgotten what it felt like to be on the other side of life. But Marcus's bravery, his selflessness, had reminded him. And that truth, Jonathan said, changed everything. He vowed to redirect his entire company, his wealth, and his influence toward rebuilding systems that uplifted struggling families. Marcus listened, stunned, as Jonathan said he wanted to help him too, not out of pity, but out of gratitude and respect. He offered Marcus a stable job with real benefits, housing support, educational opportunities for Ava, and pathways that would finally break the cycle that had trapped him for so long. Marcus's throat tightened, tears prickling in his eyes, not from the generosity, but from the feeling of finally being seen, valued, and acknowledged in a world that had ignored him for years. Many months later, Marcus found himself living a life he never imagined possible. He had a steady job, a comfortable home, and evenings where he could actually spend time with Ava instead of collapsing from exhaustion. Jonathan became a friend, a mentor, and someone Marcus prayed for every night with genuine affection. And the billionaire who nearly died in the rain used his second chance to transform not just companies but thousands of lives.